Hey there everybody, it's Mike DiLisio, and today I'm going to be reviewing Tiwanaku, an abstract, competitive, or cooperative deduction game. In the game, you are trying to determine what particular crops belong on certain terrain tiles. And you're going to be doing this through certain logistical rules that the game asks you to follow, and using this very, very impressive game component that has secret windows that kind of show you what's what. Let's head over to the table. I'll give you an idea on how the game plays, primarily focusing on the competitive mode, which is the main mode of the game. Then we'll come back here and I'll let you know what I think. To set up a game of Tiwanaku, you're first going to decide whether you want to do a short scenario or a long scenario. For this overview, I'm going to show you a long scenario. This is a double-sided board, and this is the side of the board you would use for a long scenario. Depending upon the number of players, you're going to have one of each type of crop token out here. So you've got quinoa, you've got corn, you've got chili, you've got cocoa leaf, and you've got sweet potatoes. Then you're going to choose a scenario disc. These are the short scenarios. These are the long scenarios. So you can see I got a whole bunch here. Let's just say I chose this one. You're going to look at this side of the disc, and it's going to tell you a few different things. It's going to tell you the number of each of these types of the 4 terrain tiles that you're going to have out. So 13 of these, 9, 10, and 13. And then it's also going to show you what you start on this board with. So I'll cut away here in a moment, and you'll see that when we come back, we're going to have these terrain tiles and the crop tiles on top of those. All right, so give me a second. I'll set this up and we'll see what it looks like. Okay, so now you see the board set up as it shows on the back of this scenario disc. And it's important to note that a couple of things. One, these little figures of meeples there only apply to the cooperative and solo game. I'm talking about the competitive mode for the game, which is the main mode for the game. That's what this overview is going to be about. And you really shouldn't be looking at that side of the disc because that's where all of the magic happens. Once you've got this set up the way that it says on the back of the disc, you're going to take this wheel, make sure that these windows are closed, and then you're going to place this disc inside this wheel in this direction, and it kind of slides in there, and then I'll show you what that looks like when that's all done. All right, so the scenario disc has been placed within the wheel here, and a couple of things to point out is that you've got these kind of 2 axes that you're going to be looking at. The red, which are going to be along the top and the bottom of the board, and then the white, which is going to be along the left and the right side. They just kind of go across. It's columns and rows, essentially, all right? And this is going to be the kind of the heart of the game, because this is going to be showing you what the terrain tile should be and what the crop tile should be, which is what you're trying to, especially the crop tile is really what you're trying to kind of deduce to make the correct prediction of what crop needs to be in which spot. So just to kind of show you with information that we already have, these have already been revealed at the beginning of the game, so we're not giving anything away here. If you match up these 2 symbols, which I've done here with the red here and the white there, those are those matching symbols, it should show this type of crop tile on this side, and it should show this this kind of terrain tile on that side, and then the crop tile there. So let's just double check, make sure that it's all working. Yes, I don't know if you can really see that on camera, but it is showing that type of terrain. And here, again, I don't know if you're making that out on camera. Trust me, it says 4. So that is correct. You would always want to keep those closed unless you're actively making a deduction or a guess. All right, let's talk about the gameplay. On your turn, you're going to be doing one of 2 things. You're either going to be exploring or divining. Exploring is going to be moving out on this board, kind of revealing new terrain tiles, and divining is going to be where you are trying to make the guesses. Sometimes they're going to be guesses with very little information. Sometimes you might have all of the information you need. You pretty much know you're going to be able to guess what that crop tile is. But those are essentially the 2 things you're going to be doing. You're either going to be moving around on the board by doing the explore action, and then you may lead to a discovery phase, which is where you're showing kind of what's there. And then you also could divine. Let's talk a little bit about both of those. Okay, so let's assume that the blue player is going first, and they are going to take a explore action. all of the meeples start off the board, and this is set up for player count. In a 2-player game, you're going to have 5 of these meeples. When you place them onto the board, they can come into any outside spot here. So they can go right there, they can go there, any of these open outside spots. They could also go through crop tiles, okay? Not terrain tiles, but crop tiles. So if this wasn't there, you'd have to stop there. But being that there is a crop tile here, this blue player could come through here and then go there if they wanted to, all right? Or they could just go there or there. A couple of other kind of rules about that is that you can only move orthogonally. You can move through one of your own meeples, but you cannot move through another meeple, all right? If you ever enter a space without a crop tile or without a meeple of your color, then you have to end your movement there. You can only ever have one of these Quechua meeples, as they're called, per space, all right? Once you've done that, you're going to find out what the crop tile is there. Another thing you could do is if you wanted to remove one of your meeples from the board, potentially if you had gotten all of your movement blocked later in the game, you could do that, but that would be your whole explore action. In most cases, you're either bringing a new meeple onto the board or moving a pre-existing meeple around on the board. All right, so let's say, for example, blue takes their first turn. They're going to do an explore, and they move to that spot, like I said a moment ago. What they're then going to do is they're going to reveal what what terrain tile is there by doing something similar to what I showed you before. They're going to make sure that the red symbol is lined up with that, and the white symbol is lined up with that, which is like the little kind of lizard type thing, and it's very important that you don't mess this up. You only are going to be looking at the crop type this time. So I flip that over. Again, camera's probably not going to get in there because this is, very thick. There's a lot of pieces of cardboard there, but it's showing a green crop, all right? So I would go ahead and I would take a green crop and I would place it there. Then what I do is I go to the diversity board and I move up 1 level on that tile because I've discovered one of these greenery tiles. And I'm going to get 1 point per number of my discs on that particular row. Well, of course, first when I moved up, I get 1 point. Both players actually start on 10 points. All right? So that is an explore action. I did a movement and I did a discovery. All right, now white could come along and they could do the same thing. Let's say, for example, they came down here and they wanted to discover that tile. They did a movement. Now they're doing a discovery. They go to move to the sun here and they stay on the lizard. All right, they flip that and that shows a mountain tile. All right, put a mountain tile right there. They would move theirs up 1 and they would get a point. All right. If during a later turn, white discovered a green tile, now they have 2 on the same row, they would get 2 points. If you later moved up a kind of a sand tile and all 3 were there, you'd get 3 points. So that's kind of how that works. You're incentivized to find different types of crops. So that is one of your main actions is you're going to be exploring, moving around and discovering the different terrain types that are out there. But the way you're going to get the most points is by taking the second action, which is to divine. To successfully divine in Tiwanaku, you have to know some kind of basic concepts of how the deduction works in this game. And it's actually very nice. On the back of the rule book, they kind of break down the major concepts of the game for new players. So let me just kind of have this out here to show you. So the general idea is that you're going to have different arrangements of tiles that form regions, and those can be from size 1 to 5. You'll never have a region less than 1, obviously, and you'll never have one larger than 5. There are also some restrictions. 2 regions of the same type cannot be diagonally adjacent, and they can't be orthogonally adjacent. So you will never have something like this where you have 3 and then 3 or 4 and 2, all right? You'll never be larger than 5 spaces in a region, and you're not going to ever have them like this adjacent to each other either diagonally or orthogonally. Within each of these regions, you're going to have one of each type of crop for that region. So, for example, let's say I look at this here. What I know from this right now, and this is what started on the board, is that this region is going to be at least 4 tiles large. It could potentially be up to 5. And let's say that this is a 4-tile region. I don't know that yet, but the arrangement would be, would have one number 4 crop, one number 3, one number 2, and one number 1. In a size 5, you'd have one of each. Size 3, you'd have 3, 2, and 1. 2, 2, and 1, and 1 only the single one. So that's that general idea. Also, another thing to note is that you can never have 2 identical crops be adjacent, all right? So those are the main things to know. So using that information, let's say that early on, blue player wanted to take a bit of a risk here. And they say, okay, I want to divine what crop is on this particular tile, okay? You have to divine on a crop tile that you are actually, a terrain tile that you are actually on. So what is the information they have? Really, the only information they have is that this is not a 3 or a 4 because it cannot be orthogonally adjacent to either of those. So you're taking a pretty big risk here by making this guess. So, but let's say, for example, they say, you know what? I'm going to guess that this is a 2. That this is going to be one of these crops here, okay? So what you would do is you would do very similar to what you would do with the terrain tile. You would match these up there and there. And in this case, you're going to open up this. So I'm looking for a 2 there. It's a 5. Not good, and you'll find out why not good here in a moment. So no matter what, if you get it right or wrong, that's now known information. This crop tile is going to go here. And if you guess incorrectly, you lose points based on the value of the crop that's there. So I would go all the way down to 6 points there. Unfortunate for me. If this had been a 2 instead of a 5, I still would have been wrong, but I would have only lost 2 points rather than 5. So it disincentivizes you from just wildly guessing like you saw me do right there. Let's assume for the sake of this example that instead of guessing a 2 incorrectly, I had correctly guessed the 5. So now I would have 16 points. The other thing that I would have is I would have one of these crops that I guessed correctly, in this case a quinoa, and I would take this and I'd place it into my player area, okay? At any point on your turn, whether you're doing an explore or a divination action, as long as your divining was correct, you can make an offering, okay? And you do that by turning in the crops that you have collected. You'll only ever have one of each of the types of crops. That's why there's only one per player number here. But if you turn in just one, you get no point. So there's not a whole lot of point to do that. But along here on the board, it tells you you'd get 1 point for 2, 3 for 3, 6 for 4, and 10 if you make an offering of all 5 of those crops, okay? You're going to continue to do this, going back and forth in player order, taking explore actions, showing more of what's on the board, giving a better idea of what the different tiles and crops are, and the game is going to end when the last of the terrain tiles are placed out. Once that last terrain tile is placed, then every player can get one more chance to make a single divination. And I say that that distinction of a single one because one thing that I did want to mention is that if you have multiple meeples out on the board that are on unrevealed terrain tiles, as long as you guess correctly on a divination, you can go ahead and guess again. So if you have all 5 of your meeples out there and they're all on undiscovered terrain tiles, as long as you're guessing correctly, you can just keep racking up those correct divinations, collecting all of those crops, and then even making an offering to give yourself a really big turn if you've kind of set yourself up well for that. All right, that's the general idea of Tiwanaku. As I mentioned at the beginning of the overview, there is also a cooperative mode and a solo mode that is very closely related to it. It's going to use the backs of these tiles to kind of determine what a kind of a neutral player throughout the board is going to do. But this is the main mode of the game, a competitive deduction game. Let's head back over and I'll let you know what I think. All right, well, there you have Tiwanaku. A couple of things I want to point out right here at the beginning of this is that I was showing you a deluxe edition of the game. This was something that was kickstarted, and the edition that you saw is the one I have, which is the deluxe edition. Primarily, the main differences that I'm aware of is that the terrain tiles and the crop tiles, which I kept mixing up the, the names for in the overview, are wood in this edition, whereas in the retail edition they are cardboard. But the wheel, the screen printed wooden meeples, to my knowledge, all of those are in every edition of the game. But I did want to point that out because the components you saw during the overview may be slightly different than the ones in whatever edition of the game you may come across. Let's start with that. So the components and the art. This is an abstract game, as you saw, right? It is one that is, essentially about using logic and deduction to kind of solve a puzzle. But it's done in a beautifully illustrated world. I mean, starting from the cover all the way down to the kind of the look of the wheel and the board. There's not a tremendous amount of art, but what is there I think is beautiful. The components themselves are outstanding. Now, again, as I mentioned a moment ago, these are the deluxe edition components. But from what I've seen of the differences between the two, there's not going to be a huge drop in quality. Obviously, you'll have cardboard versus wood for the terrain tiles and the crop tiles, but everything is just very, very well done. I will point out one thing. This is a huge part of the game, right? I believe it's called the Pachamama wheel, which was originally the name of the game, if I'm correct. This is my personal copy of the game, and this has worked very well for me, whereas the windows open when they're supposed to open, close when they're supposed to close. I have heard some reports that these are not as kind of tight as they should be and that they may more easily open. I don't think that that would necessarily ruin the game, but you'd have to be careful about how you are handling this wheel if that is the case with an edition you have. I have heard personal reports of this, so I'm just not saying something I've heard online. This is somebody I know that has an edition of the game that their windows don't work quite as well. Just throwing that out there. This is, a pretty elaborate cardboard component, and so you may get variations in the quality of these, although I think this is a brilliant idea mechanically. This allows you to kind of do this type of deduction in a board game without having to utilize an app, which you certainly could have done this with an app, but there's just something satisfying about this. The way that the kind of spindle comes out and you insert and remove the scenario discs is a plastic threaded kind of a mechanism. I don't know how else to put it. I do worry a little bit that that is going to hold up over time. I hope that, continuing to unscrew and screw the plastic threaded bindle there will not wear down. It is not in the time that I've had the game, but it is something to mention. Overall, though, fantastic components and a really nice, vibrant look to the game. The gameplay. So being a kind of a deduction game, me personally, as a gamer, I have had a little bit of a rocky road with deduction games. I'll put it to you that way. Some of them work very well for me. I've liked games like Cryptid to an extent, Search for Planet X, I liked that. Really actively disliked Turing Machine, which is a very wildly popular game with its own kind of cool gimmicky components as well. But that game really, I bounced off of hard. And I think it was just the manner of logic in that game did not suit my brain. Well, why am I talking about Turing Machine in this review? Because this is a deduction game that does work for me very well. The kind of the logical rules that you're asked to follow make intuitive sense to me. That may be a personal thing, and maybe this is just a simpler game. I've heard this described as kind of a mix between Minesweeper and Sudoku, and yeah, I get that. That's cool. And I like both of those things. So maybe it makes sense that I would like this version of a deduction game. But it just makes sense. You know, you've got regions from 1 to 5 tiles. You know that for whatever size of that region, there's going to be one of each of the crops. Makes sense. You're never going to have 2 regions of the same type next to each other. Makes sense. You're never going to have 2 crops of the same type adjacent to each other. Makes sense. All of that is very simple for me. I don't feel like I need to kind of consult a rule book or any. Once I get that general concept, and I got it down in the first game, I was able to just focus on the fun. And I think that Tiwanaku is a lot of fun. I really enjoy kind of just the process that this game goes through, right? It's a process early on, primarily of discovery, where you're moving around the board, discovering what the different terrain tiles are, getting a visual sense on what type of region it's most likely to be. This is very likely to be a size 3 region because of some other information I have out here. And, you know, you can certainly get the board state to a point where, as long as you've been doing everything correctly, you're not making a guess at all. You are making a declaration. I know that this is a level 2 crop. I know that that's a level 5 crop. And if you can set yourself up for very, very successful turns where you can make successful divination after successful divination, grab up those crop tiles and then make an offering, that can feel tremendously satisfying. And so I like that aspect of the game. I like a couple of little things that they did mechanically to kind of keep you from maybe gaming the system too much. The way that you are penalized for incorrect guesses, I think, is a nice way of making it so that you just can't willy-nilly say, oh, this is a 3, right? You could do it, but you're likely to get punished. I also like that you have the diversity board that makes you more inclined to try to find different types of terrain out there, because that's a nice in-game scoring. Most of your scoring is going to come from correct divinations, and most of your negative scoring, actually all your negative scoring, is going to come from the incorrect ones. But you also get some scores throughout the game just by the natural process of moving about the board and revealing terrain tiles. So overall, I think Tiwanaku is one of the best deduction games that I have played. I really, really like this one. Now, I am reviewing primarily the competitive game because that's the main mode of the game as it is expressed in the rulebook. I can tell you, though, that I have played both cooperatively and I've played solo, and I think those work as well. Although, probably my preference, if I'm going to be choosing, I'm going to take solo out of it because that's kind of its own unique thing. But if I'm choosing competitive or cooperative, I probably prefer, not probably, I do prefer the competitive game. Although if somebody is really strongly a fan of cooperative games and they like deduction, this is a really nice option to have as well. So with that being said, I'm giving Tiwanaku an 8.5 out of 10, seal of excellence. This is a deduction game that works for me. The more I play it, the more I tend to like it. It's potential that this score could even go up for me. This has been a really nice surprise. I didn't know what to expect, especially since I've had kind of a mixed reception to particular logic games, deduction games in the past. All right, well, that's going to do it for me. This is Mike DiLisio signing off from the Dice Tower Midwest Annex.